The orphan girl awoke to the dim light filtering through the small, dusty window of her room, the remnants of another lonely night weighing heavily on her heart. Since her mother's passing, her life had become a routine of silence, chores, and the constant watchfulness of her stepfather. Each day blended into the next, the walls of her home feeling more like a prison than a sanctuary. Her stepfather, a man of stern disposition and an iron will, treated her not as family but as an intruder in a world he sought to control. His rules were rigid, his expectations unreasonable, and his punishments swift whenever he sensed disobedience or even the hint of independence in her actions. She moved quietly through the house, careful not to draw attention, her small hands scrubbing the floors, washing the dishes, or tending to the animals with mechanical precision. Her stepfather had an uncanny ability to notice the slightest imperfection or perceived laziness, and his temper was quick to flare. Though he rarely raised a hand, the sharpness of his words cut deeply, leaving scars that no eyes could see but hers. Each command was a reminder of her confinement. She could not speak freely, laugh openly, or step beyond the boundaries he had set without his knowledge. The walls themselves seemed to echo his authority, and every corner of the house whispered of her inability to escape. Despite this, the girl retained a quiet strength that her stepfather could not comprehend. In the solitude of her small room, she would gaze out at the distant fields, imagining herself running through open meadows with the wind in her hair, free and unburdened. She longed to explore the forests, the riverbanks, and the bustling village square where laughter and music filled the air. But reality always reminded her of her chains of control, chains of fear, chains she could not break. Even as she dreamed of freedom, she performed her duties with diligence, knowing that any mistake could lead to scolding or further restriction. The villagers, too, seemed distant from her life, and though she often passed them during her chores, their glances were polite but indifferent. Some offered faint smiles, yet no one stepped in to ease her burden. In a strange way, their neutrality mirrored the way the world had treated her. Her mother gone, her father absent, and now a stepfather whose love was conditional and harsh. The girl had grown accustomed to solitude, finding solace in small, secret joys. The songs of the birds outside her window, the gentle rustling of leaves, and the whispered prayers she offered to her ancestors each night. These rituals, quiet and private, became her only means of connecting with a world that had otherwise closed its doors to her. Her stepfather, for all his strictness, had arranged for her to attend the village festival in name only. She was expected to watch from a distance while others danced, sang, and celebrated the vibrant traditions of their community. It was a cruel arrangement, meant to reinforce her separation from joy and communal life. He controlled every aspect of her existence, dictating her movements, her words, and even the thoughts she could safely express. The festival, which should have been a time of celebration and light, became for her a symbol of confinement, a reminder that while the village rejoiced, she remained under the watchful eye of a man who sought to suppress her spirit. Yet, beneath her quiet exterior, a spark of hope persisted. She clung to the belief that even in the harshest circumstances, there could be moments of magic, justice, and liberation. Though the stepfather's shadow loomed over her, and the walls of her home seemed to close in with each passing day, she nurtured a vision of a life where courage, endurance, and virtue could triumph over cruelty. The festival approached, carrying with it an uncertain future, and the girl felt a mixture of fear, longing, and an inexplicable sense that the coming night might change everything. In this oppressive world, the orphan girl's quiet life was more than mere survival. It was the careful cultivation of patience, hope, and inner strength. She had learned that silence could shield her, that small acts of resilience could preserve her dignity, and that even in chains, whether literal or metaphorical, the human spirit could endure. The tension before the festival was palpable, but within her chest, a quiet drumbeat of anticipation began to form, hinting at the extraordinary events that awaited her and the magical journey that would soon unfold. The village was alive with anticipation as the festival drew near. Streets were adorned with colorful banners, woven from vibrant threads that danced in the gentle breeze. Lanterns of red and gold were hung from every doorway, casting a warm glow over the cobblestone paths that twisted through the bustling town. From early morning, the air was filled with the scent of spiced foods, freshly baked bread, and the sweet aroma of flowering plants that had been carefully arranged for the celebration. Everywhere she looked, the girl saw villagers preparing with excitement, their hands moving in practiced rhythm, their faces lit with smiles that spoke of joy and freedom. Laughter echoed from every corner, mingling with the faint rhythm of drums and the occasional clatter of wooden instruments being tuned for the night's festivities. Yet, amidst the vibrant celebration, the girl felt a deep sense of unease. Her heart sank as she watched children run through the village square, spinning in circles and chasing one another with abandon. Their joy seemed effortless, untainted by the chains that bound her in her daily life. The elders shared stories and laughter, the merchants displayed their wares with pride, and even the animals seemed to sense the festive air, their excitement reflected in the playful barking of dogs and the chirping of birds. To the villagers, this festival was a time of community, connection, and celebration. But for the girl, it was a reminder of what she could not freely participate in. She had been told that she could observe the festival from afar, a privilege granted reluctantly by her stepfather. But even this allowance felt like a cruel joke. The thought of being locked away, unable to join in the dancing, singing, or feasting, filled her with a quiet dread. Her eyes often darted toward the festival grounds, watching the joy that others took for granted, feeling the weight of exclusion press upon her small shoulders. Each laugh she overheard, each drumbeat that carried through the streets, reminded her of her isolation and the oppressive control her stepfather maintained over her life. Meanwhile, her stepfather moved through the village with a calculated composure. His eyes, sharp and scrutinizing, scanned the preparations with a sense of ownership and authority. He oversaw the arrangements with meticulous care, yet beneath his calm exterior lurked a more sinister intent. The girl, aware of his controlling nature, felt a gnawing fear in her chest whenever he approached. Though he smiled and interacted with the villagers, she could sense the cold calculation behind his gestures, the careful planning of a scheme meant to keep her confined and powerless, even during the height of communal celebration. As the day drew closer to the festival, the tension in the girl's heart grew. She could hear the distant thrum of drums from the practice sessions in the village square, each beat resonating through the walls of her home. It was as though the music itself called to her, reminding her of the freedom and joy that existed just beyond her reach. And yet, alongside this call to hope, there was the constant shadow of fear. Fear of being locked away, fear of missing the one night where the village came together, and fear of the stepfather's wrath should she dare to defy him. Even as the villagers worked with infectious energy, she noticed subtle signs that the stepfather's plan was more than mere control. It was a deliberate exclusion. He spoke quietly with neighbors, exchanged knowing glances with his children, and made frequent trips to her room under the guise of supervision. Each gesture, seemingly mundane, carried a weight that pressed down on her spirit. The festival, which promised unity and celebration for most, would become for her a night of confinement and silent observation, a cruel testament to her stepfather's dominance. And yet, despite the growing fear, the girl felt a flicker of resolve within her. The drums, the laughter, and even the decorations seemed to pulse with life, hinting at something extraordinary about to unfold. Though she did not yet understand the nature of what awaited her, there was a sense in her heart that the festival would not remain a night of oppression. Somewhere beneath the fear and anticipation, a quiet drumbeat of courage began to resonate, connecting her to forces she could not yet name. As night approached, the village was ready. Lanterns glowed, merchants concluded their final arrangements, and children raced along the paths in playful excitement. Yet behind the closed doors of her room, the girl felt the oppressive weight of expectation and confinement. The festival approached, carrying with it both the promise of celebration and the looming shadow of her stepfather's cruel plan. In that moment, she realized that the night would test her courage, endurance, and faith in ways she had never imagined, and that something extraordinary was already stirring just beyond the walls of her confinement. The night of the festival arrived, and with it, a tense hush fell over the girl's home. While the village streets sparkled with lanterns and echoed with laughter, inside the air was heavy with fear and anticipation. Her stepfather moved with quiet precision, ensuring every step of his plan would be executed flawlessly. He had waited for this night, the one when the village would be fully immersed in celebration, to assert his control over the girl in the most humiliating way possible. To him, the festival was not a time for joy, it was an opportunity to reinforce his authority and quash the small spark of independence he feared resided in her heart. His motives were clear though complex. Over the months, he had grown increasingly jealous of her resilience, the subtle defiance that lingered behind her quiet obedience, and the occasional glimmers of intelligence and charm that the villagers had begun to notice. The girl's capacity for patience, her ability to endure hardship without complaint, and her gentle interactions with animals and neighbors had begun to unsettle him. He feared that others might admire her more than him, that she could gain recognition he had long sought to control, and that his household would no longer appear as an unchallenged domain. The festival provided the perfect cover for a cruel scheme: lock her away, deny her participation, and demonstrate to all, though unseen, that her spirit was under his complete authority. As the evening wore on, the girl felt the weight of unease pressing against her chest. She noticed her stepfather lingering near her room with a set of heavy keys in his hand, the clink of metal sending chills through her. Her senses sharpened, and she understood that danger was imminent, though she could do little to change her circumstances. The locked room had always been a place of discomfort, and now it would serve as a prison during the very celebration she longed to witness. Her attempts to voice concern, to plead or reason with him, were met with cold, dismissive glances. Words were useless here, the power imbalance was absolute. He moved methodically, checking doors, ensuring that windows were latched, and instructing the children to remain silent and obedient. Every step was designed to eliminate the possibility of escape. Even as the girl tried to imagine fleeing, the reality pressed down. There was nowhere to hide, no ally within the household, and the festival's noise outside would drown out any cry for help. Her heart pounded, and yet she fought to remain calm, drawing on the small reserves of courage she had cultivated over years of hardship. She realized that resistance, for now, was subtle, an internal fortitude rather than an outward defiance. By the time the stepfather was ready, the girl was gently ushered, or rather forced, into the dim room at the top of the house. The door shut with a definitive click, the heavy bolt sliding into place. Outside, the festival raged on, laughter and drumbeats echoing through the night, while inside, the girl's small world became dark and silent. Fear threatened to consume her, but amidst the dread, a quiet spark of anticipation flickered, a sense that this night, though designed to suppress her, might also hold the seeds of something extraordinary. The stepfather's cruel plan had been enacted, yet unknowingly he had set the stage for forces beyond his control to intervene. The girl sat in the shadows of the locked room, her chest rising and falling with a mixture of fear and courage, sensing that though the chains of control had tightened around her, the night itself had other plans. As the night deepened, the girl sat alone in the dimly lit room, her back pressed against the cold, splintered wall. The oppressive silence of confinement weighed heavily upon her, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a reminder of her isolation. Outside, the sounds of the festival reached her ears, a distant murmur of laughter, the rustle of skirts and cloaks as villagers moved through the square, and most distinctly, the rhythmic beating of drums. At first, the sound was ordinary, a familiar accompaniment to any festival. But as she listened, she noticed something extraordinary. The drums seemed to call directly to her, resonating in a way that felt deeply personal, almost alive. Each beat struck her heart with a clarity that she had never experienced. The sound vibrated through the walls and floors, yet it carried a warmth, a subtle invitation that reached beyond the barriers of wood and stone. It was as if the drums themselves recognized her presence, acknowledging her suffering and offering a quiet reassurance. She felt her chest lift with a mixture of astonishment and relief, the oppressive weight of fear easing slightly with every rhythmic pulse. The girl could not explain why, but her mind seemed to synchronize with the tempo, her thoughts flowing in harmony with the drumbeats as though an invisible connection had been forged. She pressed her palms against the cold floor, feeling the vibrations travel through her fingers and up her arms. The resonance was not merely auditory, it seemed almost tactile, a gentle energy that embraced her from within. For the first time since she had been locked away, she felt a subtle spark of hope igniting in her chest. Each drumbeat whispered a promise that she was not entirely alone, that the world outside had not forgotten her, and that forces beyond the mundane were attuned to her presence. The mystical quality of the drums grew stronger with each passing moment. She could sense an intelligence behind the rhythm, as if the very music were guiding her, communicating something profound she had yet to understand. Her fear remained, but it was now intertwined with wonder, a recognition that the festival, which had been intended to exclude and humiliate her, might instead hold the key to something extraordinary. She closed her eyes and let herself drift with the sound, feeling a strange alignment between the cadence outside and the steady beat of her own heart. The room, once dark and confining, seemed to shimmer with a subtle shift. Shadows danced faintly on the walls as if moved by the invisible hands of the festival drums. A soft warmth crept into the corners and the air, though still cold, carried a hint of life. The girl's mind opened to possibilities beyond fear. Perhaps the drums were not merely instruments of celebration but instruments of destiny. Perhaps they had chosen her, or perhaps she had been chosen to receive their message. She rose cautiously to her feet, her bare toes pressing against the rough wood floor, and allowed herself a tentative step toward the window. Though she could not yet see the festival in full, she felt the energy of the drums more intensely here, as if the walls themselves were amplifying their mystical resonance. The beat was no longer just music, it was a language she did not fully understand, speaking directly to her courage, her hope, and her spirit. In that moment, the girl realized that the festival, her confinement, and the magical rhythm of the drums were intertwined, signaling the beginning of a night that would forever change her life. The girl remained by the window, her body pressed against the cold wooden frame, but her mind had begun to drift into a realm that felt far removed from the oppressive room she had been locked in. The drums outside no longer merely echoed through the village. They resonated deep within her, filling the empty spaces of her fear with a steady, rhythmic energy. Each beat seemed deliberate, as though the festival itself had taken notice of her confinement and had chosen to offer her guidance. The air vibrated with a gentle power, a warmth that carried reassurance and courage, pushing back against the anxiety that had gripped her chest all day. As she listened, the girl felt a subtle shift in her perception. The drums were no longer just instruments, they were voices speaking a language she could feel rather than hear. The rhythm seemed to align with her heartbeat, creating a harmony that steadied her thoughts and calmed the tremors in her hands. Her fear, once a constant companion, began to transform. It did not vanish completely, but it no longer held dominance over her spirit. In its place rose a quiet courage, a growing conviction that she was not merely a passive victim of her stepfather's cruelty. Something beyond the ordinary, the unseen energy of the festival, the spirits of the ancestors, or perhaps a protective magic in the air, had chosen her, had recognized her endurance and was offering its strength. The girl's eyes widened as she noticed subtle shifts in the room around her. Shadows seemed to respond to the rhythm, dancing lightly along the walls in sync with the drumbeats. The air felt alive, charged with an energy that was both comforting and empowering. It was as though the drums themselves had agency, almost sentient in their awareness of her presence. Every beat encouraged her to move, to breathe deeply, and to find the inner fortitude she had long believed she lacked. She began to sway gently, guided by the rhythm, her small movements a silent dance of defiance and hope. With each pulse, she became more aware that the festival was no longer something from which she was excluded. In a spiritual sense, the night belonged to her. The drums called her into participation, breaking the invisible barriers her stepfather had imposed. She felt herself connected to the villagers beyond the walls, their collective celebration mingling with the unseen forces that now protected her. The realization was profound. Though her body was confined, her spirit was free. The festival, in essence, had recognized her courage and transformed her isolation into a conduit for something extraordinary. Her mind replayed every cruel act that had led her to this moment, every harsh word, every lonely hour, and she understood them differently now. Each trial had prepared her, shaping a resilience that the drums themselves seemed to acknowledge. She felt a surge of gratitude toward the mysterious force that had chosen to intervene, a power that did not punish or coerce but guided and uplifted. Her fear faded further with every beat, replaced by a quiet certainty that she could endure anything, that the night, with all its music and magic, was a space where justice, courage, and wonder converged. By the time the final drumbeats echoed across the village square, the girl's fear had entirely transformed. She stood taller, her back straighter, her eyes shining with newfound determination. Though the room was still locked, she felt a protective energy surrounding her, a presence that seemed to whisper, "You are not alone. You are chosen. You are safe." In that instant, the girl understood that the magic of sound, the drums that played only for her, was not just music, but a bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary, a spiritual force that promised liberation, courage, and the awakening of a destiny far greater than she had ever imagined. As the festival reached its peak, the villagers reveled in music, dance, and celebration. Lanterns glimmered along the streets, merchants displayed their wares with pride, and children ran laughing through the crowd. Yet amidst the joyous clamor, some villagers began to notice something unusual about the drums. Their rhythm, though familiar, carried a subtle difference, an intensity, a cadence that seemed sharper, more alive, almost as if the instruments themselves were responding to an unseen presence. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, growing louder as more ears attuned to the strange phenomenon. "Do you feel that?" an elderly woman asked her neighbor, her eyes narrowing. "The drums, they're different tonight. Have you noticed?" The neighbor paused mid-step, tilting his head as the deep beats resonated through the plaza. "I thought it was just my imagination," he replied, but his voice wavered with a hint of uncertainty. "But yes, there is something unusual. Almost like they are calling to someone." As the villagers exchanged observations, others began to speculate. Some joked nervously, suggesting it might be the spirits of the ancestors joining the festival. Others whispered more seriously, claiming that the rhythm of the drums was meant for a single person, someone special, someone unseen yet present in the village that night. The idea seemed impossible yet undeniable, a mystical force threading through the familiar music, bending the festival's energy toward an unknown focal point. Curiosity and concern spread quickly. People moved closer to the central square, trying to discern whether the strange sound originated from the drums themselves or from something else entirely. Children, sensing the tension among the adults, paused in their play, ears straining to hear the difference. The air carried a subtle charge, an energy that heightened senses and sharpened awareness. Even the village elders, seated upon their ceremonial benches, leaned forward slightly, listening with furrowed brows as they attempted to make sense of the anomaly. The more they listened, the more villagers sensed an intangible presence within the festival. Some claimed they could feel it in their chests, a pull, a quiet call that drew their attention not just to the drums, but to the direction of the girl's locked room. Yet no one dared speak her name aloud. Though they suspected the rhythm was meant for her, she was invisible to their eyes, hidden from their view. And so, the whispers continued, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and unease. Even as speculation mounted, the festival maintained its outward appearance of normalcy. Dancers continued to twirl, drums continued to pound, and the crowd's laughter rang out under the glowing lanterns. But underneath the surface, the villagers felt a subtle shift in the energy around them. Their hearts beat in sync with the mysterious rhythm, their thoughts drawn to someone unknown, someone extraordinary. It was as if the festival itself had acknowledged her presence, bending its celebration to recognize the girl's quiet endurance, her suffering, and her courage. By the time the first hour of the night passed, it became clear to those attuned that the drums were not simply music. They were a language, a message being sent to someone who could receive it. Even without seeing her, the villagers felt the singular focus of the rhythm and began to sense that something magical was unfolding in their midst. A mixture of curiosity, reverence, and apprehension settled over the crowd as they waited, unaware that the very person they speculated about was listening from within her locked room, feeling every beat, every pulse, every echo meant solely for her. Inside the dim, cold room, the girl lifted her head and straightened her back. The walls that once seemed to cage her now felt less like barriers and more like witnesses to her quiet defiance. Each drumbeat from the festival outside reverberated through the floorboards, through the walls, and into her very bones. Rather than shrinking from it, she allowed herself to be carried by the rhythm, letting it awaken a strength she had long kept hidden. Her heart pounded in tandem with the drums, not in fear but in growing determination. With tentative steps, she began to sway lightly, her bare feet moving over the rough wooden floor. Each motion was a silent rebellion, a subtle declaration that her spirit could not be confined. She hummed along with the rhythm, a soft, melodic voice rising from her lips, merging with the distant pounding of drums. Though the sound was barely audible over the festival, it carried in the small room like a personal anthem, a celebration of courage that no lock or bolt could restrain. As she danced in place, spinning slowly and deliberately, she felt an exhilarating sense of freedom. The chains of fear that had weighed on her for so long seemed to loosen, replaced by an invisible energy that flowed directly from the drums. It was as if the instruments themselves recognized her bravery and mirrored it back to her, guiding her movements, lifting her spirit, and transforming her confinement into a space of empowerment. Each step, each sway, was a silent act of defiance, communicating to her stepfather that though her body was trapped, her will remained untouchable. Unbeknownst to her, the stepfather lingered outside her door, a growing unease settling over him. He had initially believed that locking her away would suppress her, break her spirit, and render her obedient. Yet now, with each reverberation of the magical drums, he sensed a force he could neither understand nor control. The girl's quiet humming, her graceful movements, and the glow of determination in her eyes created a palpable tension. The room seemed alive with a power beyond his comprehension, and anxiety began to replace the confidence he had carried into the night. The girl, feeling the intensity of the connection, allowed herself to smile faintly. She understood that her courage was no longer a private flame, it had become something visible, something undeniable, something that even her oppressor could feel. Though she remained locked in place, the energy she exuded seemed to bend the very night in her favor. The rhythm of the drums and the harmony of her defiance created an invisible shield, a barrier that no human cruelty could penetrate. In that moment she realized that the festival, intended to celebrate others while excluding her, had become a stage for her own quiet triumph. Every drumbeat strengthened her resolve. Every movement reaffirmed her spirit. Though confined in the small, dark room, she stood taller than ever, a living testament to courage and resilience. And with each passing moment, the stepfather's anxiety grew, for he began to understand, too late, that the magical connection between the girl and the drums was not something he could break, no matter how much he. The girl's movements became more confident as the rhythm of the drums strengthened, each beat resonating like a call to action rather than mere music. The vibrations traveled through the floor and walls, guiding her hands and feet as though the very energy of the drums could reach inside her, directing her motions with gentle insistence. Every sway, every step, felt purposeful, as if an invisible hand were leading her toward something beyond the limitations of her small, confining room. She reached toward the window, her fingers tracing the rough wooden frame. The rhythm seemed to pulse against her palms, and she realized that the vibrations were revealing something hidden. A weakness, a secret, or perhaps an opportunity. Encouraged by the drumbeats, she tested the latch with careful patience, moving in harmony with the music. Each beat of the drum was a guide, turning what once felt impossible into a challenge she could meet. Slowly, methodically, she worked with the rhythm, feeling a connection between her spirit and the festival's energy. As her hands pressed against the latch, the drums seemed to crescendo, vibrating with an almost sentient force that urged her onward. She could feel a warmth, a protective presence, like the ancestors themselves had joined in the festival's celebration just for her. The energy flowing from the drums was not merely sound, it was guidance, courage, and blessing all at once. With each pulse, she gained clarity, a deep sense that she was not alone, that every hardship she had endured had prepared her for this moment. Finally, under the guiding rhythm, the latch yielded. The window creaked open, revealing the night sky and the distant glow of festival lights. The girl inhaled deeply, the cool night air filling her lungs, and felt a rush of exhilaration. The drum's energy was now unmistakable in its purpose. They were leading her to freedom. She placed her hands on the window frame, ready to step beyond the confines of her room, and felt a profound connection to the life and joy waiting outside. Even as her stepfather paced anxiously beyond the door, unaware of the invisible force assisting her, the girl felt empowered. The drumbeats symbolized more than music. They were courage incarnate, ancestral guidance, and a promise that justice and resilience would prevail. Each step she prepared to take was in harmony with the rhythm, a dance of liberation choreographed by forces beyond the ordinary. In that moment, she understood that the night, the festival, and the magical drums had aligned to honor her endurance. Her spirit had responded to their call, transforming fear into action and confinement into a stage for her liberation. The window was no longer just an opening, it was a portal, a bridge between oppression and freedom, illuminated and guided by the rhythm that had chosen her. With the drums leading the way, she prepared to step into the world outside, carrying with her the courage, blessing, and ancestral energy that had made the impossible possible. Outside the locked room, the stepfather's face was a mask of confusion and growing dread. He had expected compliance, silence, and submission from the girl, but the events unfolding defied all his calculations. The rhythmic drumming from the festival seemed to pulse with a life of its own, responding directly to her presence. No matter how much he tried to assert his authority, a strange energy undermined every command, every attempt to intimidate. The power he believed he wielded over her now slipped like sand through his fingers, leaving him vulnerable and anxious. As he paced back and forth, his thoughts raced. Each drumbeat, each subtle movement from within the room, seemed to echo with a force he could neither see nor control. He could feel it in his chest, a vibration that resonated through the floorboards, bypassing logic and sense. The stepfather realized, with a cold shock, that whatever was happening was beyond human interference. His cruelty, meant to humiliate and dominate, was being undone by something far more powerful, far more deliberate. Panic gnawed at him, a sharp contrast to the calm determination growing inside the girl. He paused at the door, listening as a soft humming drifted from within, perfectly in tune with the drums outside. The sound was faint yet unerringly precise, a signal that the girl's courage was no longer contained. The stepfather's brow furrowed, and his hands clenched into fists. His mind struggled to reconcile the ordinary with the extraordinary. A simple village festival, drums, and a locked room had somehow combined to strip him of the power he had wielded with ease for so long. Fear, raw and unfamiliar, began to dominate his thoughts. Every moment that passed intensified his panic. The girl's presence, once a source of control, had become a focal point for forces he could not comprehend. The drums outside seemed to reinforce this, their cadence growing more insistent, more alive, as if guiding her, strengthening her, and marking the stepfather's diminishing influence. With each synchronized movement she made, he felt a weight pressing upon him, an invisible scrutiny that left him uncertain and exposed. His voice, once commanding and harsh, faltered when he attempted to call her attention, and the usual threats that had worked in the past now echoed emptily in the corridor. Fear tightened around him, sharp and unrelenting, while the girl, guided by the magical rhythm, stood taller in the shadows of her confinement. Every subtle motion, every small act of defiance, amplified the stepfather's anxiety. He realized that the night, meant to enforce obedience, had become a stage for her liberation. The contrast between his panic and her growing confidence could not have been more stark. She had become a beacon of resilience, illuminated and protected by forces beyond the ordinary, and his attempts to assert authority were crumbling before his eyes. In that tense, quiet confrontation of wills, the stepfather understood the truth too late. The cruelty he had relied on, the fear he had cultivated, was powerless against the courage and unseen protection that had chosen her. Each drumbeat was now a hammer of justice, striking at the foundation of his dominance, and he could only watch as the girl's confidence rose, unshaken and unstoppable. The story of the girl who had been locked away on the night of the festival quickly became more than a tale whispered among neighbors. It became a legend that the village carried in its collective memory. Parents recounted it to their children, emphasizing the courage that allowed a single spirit to transform fear into triumph. The drums, which had once seemed ordinary instruments of celebration, became symbolic of unseen forces and ancestral blessings, reminding all who listened that true bravery could not be confined by walls or chains. Even when locked away, the spirit of courage plays its own drum, the villagers would say, passing the phrase from generation to generation as a mantra of hope and resilience. The moral of the story resonated deeply. Cruelty, no matter how meticulously planned, could never completely silence the brave. The girl's endurance, her connection to the magical rhythm of the festival, and her unwavering integrity revealed a truth that could not be ignored. Resilience and purity have a voice that transcends physical confinement. The stepfather's attempt to dominate and humiliate her ultimately failed, overshadowed by her unwavering courage and the unseen forces that supported her. Her story became a lesson, teaching the community that oppression may challenge the innocent, but it can never overpower the essence of a determined and virtuous heart. In time, the girl's presence extended beyond the boundaries of the village. Travelers brought the story to neighboring towns, weaving it into broader folklore, and the festival itself came to honor her indirectly. Every beat of the drums was a reminder that courage, like music, travels beyond barriers. The girl's memory became a symbol of hope, a testament that even the most isolated and oppressed individuals could inspire change and leave an enduring mark on society. Her legend endured, not just for the miraculous events or the magical drumbeats, but for the demonstration of her inner strength and purity. She had turned a night of fear and isolation into a story of empowerment. In every retelling, the courage of a single girl reminded countless others that oppression can be challenged, that hope can persist in the darkest moments, and that the spirit of the brave always resonates far beyond the chains that attempt to bind it.